I've actually turned away from the talk that I was going to give, because I thought what I would like to do, with everybody's permission, is to give some reflection on some of the things that we've heard today, and not particularly because I'm an expert on migration, or indeed really on slavery, but because I've worked in this area now for about 5 years on linked areas, and having worked with the church for much longer. And I've been very interested by some of the things that have been talked about today. And I'd just like to begin by saying that earlier on this year, in February, we put on a conference in York, to which Gary came, and we tried very hard to talk and find some people who could talk for us about modern slavery in rural areas. And it was impossible to find anybody who actually seemed to know anything about what was happening. And so I would like to say how interesting I found today. Obviously, Gary hadn't done his research by then, but for me, it's been a real eye-opener. And I think for the Church of England, we have this project which we call the Clewer Initiative. So this project grew out of some work initially that was done by our chair, Bishop Alistair Redfern, when he was bishop in Lincolnshire about 10 years ago, and he noticed the position of migrant workers while he was there. He carried that interest through into his later job as Bishop of Derby, and then into the House of Lords, where he was involved in the making of the Modern Slavery Act. And indeed, although he's retired, he still chairs the advisory group for Sarah Thornton, the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, and is very involved both nationally and internationally on an advisory level. So this project really has some good connections and has been around for some time. So can I just ask, and this isn't a question about whether you believe in God or not, but it's a question about whether you're aware of how the Church of England works. Could you put your hand up if you are familiar with it? Not a belief-related question, just a Church of England-related question. We've got one person over there who knows how it works, and I know that person because she's one of our diocesan project leads. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Church of England, just because I think it will help you to understand where we're coming from with regards to modern slavery and with migration. So basically, we are, as the name suggests, the institutional church of the Church of England. And we have a presence literally over every geographical part of the country, because we have a parish-based system. And so the entirety of England is divided into parishes. There are about 16,000 altogether. And where one parish finishes, the other parish ends. So wherever you are, whether you want to be in it or not, you are in a Church of England parish. Those parishes are then grouped into dioceses. We have 42 dioceses in the country, and each diocese, and this is the bit that I hope you'll see this is actually quite relevant, has a very good structure within it. So we have bishops, but we also have administrative staff, we've got clergy, and we've got a whole lot of functions that come out of that, besides the direct belief in God sort of functions. And critically, with regard to modern slavery and migration, we have 33,000 social action projects, at least, all over the country. So that's a lot of social action projects, and those are dedicated pieces of work dealing with one or two subjects. And most churches will have other bits of work that they do in addition to that. So one of the things that I was interested about with Rosmini, it was interesting seeing that it had begun with some people turning up in a Catholic church hall, I think, if I understood it correctly. That actually it has its roots in some sort of church. And I only say that because and I'm going to use the word mishmash, I hope you don't find that an insulting word, but the sort of mishmash of services that it's providing are very much like the sort of services you might find provided in a Church of England church in a parish. And why is this relevant? Well, I think it's relevant because modern slavery, by and large, has a correlation with vulnerability, and it can be all sorts of vulnerability. It can be the vulnerability of being not being able to speak the English language in a country where everybody else is speaking it. It can be the vulnerability of not knowing what the systems are supposed to be like. It can be the vulnerability of having a mental health issue, an addiction issue, of having no house. It can be a vulnerability of being a child from a home where your parents are working full-time. And not all those conditions are automatically make you vulnerable, but they can lead to a tendency to vulnerability. And the things I think it's very easy to forget, and I only say this because I work with church congregations all over the country, and I have a huge difficulty persuading people of this, that actually modern slavery is serious and organised crime. And I think that this morning Sarah touched on some of that in her presentation, that actually it's not one victim in one place in isolation. It's very often many victims in many locations run from one particular person or one particular group outside the country possibly. And so, I mean, once you begin to understand that, you begin to understand that perhaps our response as a group of people should be slightly different to it. So what might be the advantage of the Church of England being involved in this arena? Well, we've talked about our geographical coverage. We've talked about, I've mentioned Bishop Alistair Redfern, who was instrumental in setting up Clewer. And I mentioned the fact that we're also working in parish level. So we have this huge panoramic sweep of the country, of the government structures, and of actually what's happening on the ground, and every little bit in between. And we are really trying to use that viewpoint to make a difference. So just to come on a bit more to talk about Clewer. So we began this intentional piece of work. I was the person who was appointed to work in this area almost exactly 3 years ago. I began on the 19th of November, and I began with nothing, really just a vision and 3 years worth of funding. And during that time, we've done some awareness raising work. We've done some work with statutory organisations around identifying victims, and a very large part of our work has been trying to involve the Church of England in some of these statutory partnerships, because we feel that we've got a lot that we can offer them in terms of person power and in terms of expertise. And the third thing that we wanted to do was to get into the arena of victim care and support. We have been fortunate. We've managed the first two aims. The victim care and support has been very, very difficult for us to enter into. And it was with enormous pleasure that I heard earlier on this year that we have been given an extremely large amount of funding, which will take us on with the greatly enhanced staff capacity for another 10 years. And so we now have the capacity as an organisation to think about what we're going to do and to plan ahead. And instead of beginning as we began 3 years ago from nothing, we've got, in marketing terms, some quite good brand awareness. We also know that we've made some mistakes and not done things very well, but we also know that we have done some things very well. And so we're able to pull those aspects together to help us to grow a better project. So why should we be particularly interested in rural communities, or what might be our contribution towards modern slavery in the rural? Well, I think that if you think about rural communities, in most rural communities there is a church, and our experiences, leaving God out of it still, is that the church is often very well used by the local population for other activities. So you might get, I suppose things which are maybe loosely associated with religious activities, like Mothering Sunday, like all the festivities around Christmas. You have your cake sales. You quite often have women's groups there. But all those sorts of things form some sort of cohesive hub for a community, and we feel that in the rural areas can be particularly useful. The other thing is that we do have a network of people within the Church of England who are working in rural areas. So we have farm chaplains, so people who go out and look after farmers. We have people who are providing chaplaincy around big organisations. We have a whole network of clergy who see the care of the people in their parishes as one of their concerns, whether or not they actually come into church. And so what we're doing is trying to raise awareness within those contexts of the project that we're doing, and also to move people on to thinking about how they can make a positive addition to it. And I'm sorry, I'm only giving you real highlights for what is quite a large and complex piece of work. So I think one of the things that's been very interesting for us in connection with Brexit is that the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, has felt the need to make some statements about it. And we realise that there is a need, that Brexit is causing problems all over the country, and that there is a need for some sort of presence or community cohesion to try and stop some of this friction that's happening in communities. And it isn't my piece of work, but there is a large piece of work going on in my own department in the Church of England around how the Church can respond to Brexit and how it can help to fill in some of these problems around communities that there are. And I would just make one comment about the farming community. I mean, our experience is that they're not all bad. In fact, most of them are trying very hard to be good. And, you know, a lot of the rhetoric, and I'm not saying that it's happened today, but a lot of the rhetoric that there is around farming is that these farmers are bad people who are exploiting workers for their own gain. And I mean, I'm not an expert in this area, but I am told by the farm chaplains that this is causing quite a lot of difficulty among that particular community. And we do need to be sensitive about some of the messages that we give out to them. And there's no comment on what's happened today at all. So I think just to finish, I'd like to reflect on one piece of work that we're doing in a town. I think I can name it because it's in the public arena. So Bridgewater, which is in Somerset, where there is Hinkley Point, which is the largest construction project in Europe. And we have some very active work going on in that diocese, the Diocese of Bath and Wells. And it's been very interesting actually listening to Anita talk about some of the problems at Rosmini, because I think that possibly, and this is only a personal reflection based on the work that's going there, that maybe Hinkley is moving in the same direction, because they have had an enormous influx of workers into that very small town, and the sort of issues that are being reported by the churches there are very similar, I think, to some of the issues that you've highlighted today. And I'm sure that we can learn from some of the work that's been carried out in Hinkley, from some of Gary's research, from some of the research, where have the other people gone? Hello. From some of your research as well. I would really like to know more about it, that we could use that to think about what's happening in Hinkley with the church group there. And there are probably other areas in the country as well, which would be highly relevant. And so, you know, I suppose I just want to say thank you for inviting me today. Thank you for giving me a chance to say something about what we're doing. And thank you very much indeed for the work that you've done. Thank you.